So one of the things that we talked about in class, and I didn't get a chance to talk in my other classes, was the dialectical method, or the process of change. We have the what is and the what could be, and those two things are always in flux. And the change then usually is something in between the two. Well, it has to be in between the two. I mean, it could be to the far extreme, but it's usually in between the two, between the what is and what could be. And that we call synthesis, right? The center. And that's how change happens, oftentimes incrementally, right? Those who want to keep things the way they are, they want to conserve the way things are fighting against those who want change, those who want, they would consider it progress, right? Rational choice approach. But the individuals who are conservative may not see that as positive change, good for them. And so rationally, they're going to push against it or fight against it. So you have those who want to maintain the status quo and always countered by those who want some kind of change or a change in the system. Right, and that, again, the dialectical process of change. We talked about the quality of life hill. We talked about, again, back to rational choice, that the interests that you and I have that drive us to what we define as our pinnacle of our hill, that whether it's purposive or material or solidary in terms of our interests, those are the things that motivate us. That's universal, right? Now, the exact same things that motivate you may not motivate the next person, the person sitting next to you. We know that to be true, right? It may not be material interests that you may have, it may not be wealth, maybe a cleaner environment, a better environment. It may be individuals getting one, maybe taking care of children, taking care of animals. Those are all things that don't necessarily have a material benefit, but maybe have a purposive benefit. Or maybe what interests you is the ability to just hang out with your friends and enjoy, the camaraderie of being with other like-minded individuals, right? That may not necessarily be a purposive interest, maybe more of a solidary or a friendship type of interest, but those are all things that interest us and motivate our decisions that we make. And we tend then to want a government, right, one that structures society and decides who gets what, to favor those interests that we favor. And sometimes those interests conflict, and a lot of times those interests conflict. And that's what gives us our two political parties and our political conflicts. And so keeping that in mind, that it's the individual self-interest that drive the decisions we make, and when those things create conflict, that's what gives us the political friction. Well, that's been true since the beginning of time, right? Since we've had civilization and societies, and the necessity of law, and the discerning of whether the law benefits me or doesn't benefit me, is something that we've had, again, since the beginning. We're interested, our American system of government, we're interested in our system, right, the American system, but how we got to our system. And as I told you guys already for class, it's going to start out by talking about the history that gets us to the point of where the Constitution is ultimately ratified and becomes the law of the land. And so if we're going to look at the Constitution, whether flexible or rigid, and through the originalist viewpoint, try to get to the understanding of what the author intended for us to interpret, right? The one true way to interpret the written word is as the author intended it to be interpreted. If we're going to get to that, then we've got to get some understanding of what the motivations were, what the context is that gives us the content of the Constitution. So what leads to the Constitution? Because once we know that, once we know what's going on, swirling around it, then we have a better understanding of what the intentions were behind the words in the Constitution. And as then we over time, we've debated, we've reinterpreted the Constitution over time, but we can get to some, not necessarily agreement, but some understanding as to what the framers, the founders of the Constitution wanted, and whether it's properly being adhered to or not, whether judges are off base in their interpretation, whether Congress is outside the Constitution and laws that it's passing, whether our reliance upon the federal government versus the state, how they interact is within the framework, and whether you're okay if it's not, whether you're okay with it if it's not. Some individuals, like I said, if you're following that Roosevelt's quote there of a living, breathing Constitution, you're okay with it not being so rigid and this kind of flexible, flowing change in the role and responsibility of government. Others, on the other hand, look at government and recognize that if government's the structuring entity and government's the entity that decides who gets what, how much power you give government, right, should be of some concern. And the Constitution as we look into the content, gets us to the content, we look at the context around it. The Constitution was written as a document that hems in the power of government. Right? And so, I want to get to that. And then we can go from there. So, a natural place to start really is with Columbus. Right? Columbus ultimately discovers the New World. And we know that that's not exactly true. Right? We know that there are individuals from Europe who were in what is now the United States, North America, well before Columbus was. But it's Columbus that ultimately mainstreams it, and other individuals, other explorers of his time that helped to solidify the wide knowledge that there is a quote-unquote New World, and from that, policies that are developed in the established governments, particularly in Western Europe, that then seek to control this New World, to put a foothold into it, to reap the resources and benefits of this New World has to offer. And that becomes a competition that kind of sets off this seeking, establishing, colonizing, and controlling of this newfound world. The motivation of Columbus was, again, a personal motivation, probably adventure, but to a large degree it was material. Columbus believed that he had a better way to get to the Orient, to get to the silk and to the spices that were draining cash and currency out of Western Europe for parts east. And the expense of getting things from the far east over and to, and this will help you out, right? That's Italy, obviously, right? And so getting things from the far east into Europe, there's a cost to that, whether you're going across land or through the Mediterranean, there's a cost to that. And the cost is, well, same costs that we think about in terms of logistics today, right? What does it take to get things from point A to point B? What are the tolls in place? What are the taxes in place? What are the risks of robbers? These are all things. Then you get into retail versus wholesale, right? So you have the middleman costs. Those are all expenses that are added in our day-to-day lives in terms of buying and selling, right? And so Columbus has this idea, he's not alone, but he has this idea that he's pitching that the world's not as flat as you think it is. And there's more than one way to get to these silks and these spices way down here. In fact, if the world's not flat but round, if we sail out, right, to the west, we're going to end up over here in the east. So that's his big pitch. Now he's got to sell it to get the financing for it. Now, Columbus himself is Italian, so we know that it's Spain that ultimately funds his travels, right? So coming forward, we know that Columbus doesn't find the path to the Indies, to the Orient. We know that he runs into two huge continents in his way that keep him from going any further forward. But that discovery, even though he may be confused about it, even though he may not know that he's discovered this quote-unquote New World, others are quick to capitalize on it. In fact, one of the explorers that comes out very shortly after Columbus, and I should remind individuals, this is not a history class per se, where I'm not going to hold you to knowing specific dates and specific when specific things happen via date. I'm not going to say which year did Columbus sail the ocean blue. Does anybody know that anymore? Yeah, right? 1492. You'll never see a test question about it. All right, I'll never ask you things like that. Only because there's so many dates and so much information. I'm probably not going to remember all those dates. I haven't necessarily committed them all to memory by date, but I got the timeline down. Okay. So I have this idea of when things happen, and that's what I want you to have as well. As we build this context up to the Constitution, we're going to be pulling things out of our history, and some of them might be right next to each other, only 5 years away from one another. The Townsend duties and the Boston Tea Party, things like that may be very, very close to one another, but other things may be very far apart from one another, right? Like the attempted colonization of Roanoke Island and the French and Indian War. Those may not be very close to one another. So we're not going to focus on the years, but I just want you to try to get, again, this the consideration and appreciation of the timeline. So here we are in the 1490s, 1492. Shortly thereafter, I think it's 1497, John Cabot flies under an English flag versus a Spanish flag, and he discovers some newfound land, right? And they still call it Newfoundland, right? Newfoundland, Canada, Newfoundland, Canada, Newfoundland, Canada. So he touches ground and discovers, quote unquote, that, and sails back, and he says, hey, that Columbus, he's not so crazy. There's some newfound land over there. It's not the path to the Orient, but there's a lot of value over there. And it's true. There's a lot of value over here. Remember, when we talk about the quality of life hill, and we talk about in terms of material wealth anyway, this is resources, right? Right? What does government do? Government decides who gets what. Government reallocates scarce resources. Right? Scarce resources. Funny thing, the less scarce a resource, in other words, the more readily available that resource is, the less need for government there is in determining who gets that resource, structuring that distribution of that resource. So the more of a resource there is, the less there is for need of government. And the more resources that you have access to, right, that don't compromise my access to those resources, don't conflict with how much I need, then the less government we ultimately can involve ourselves with, right? Involves ourselves in our lives. All right, so this, even though it's going to be government driven here, but as individuals, as we begin to think about what's going to motivate us to push us to this new world as colonizers, as the colonists, is that promise of resources, is that promise of the wealth that comes with those resources that are there really for the taking. Never mind the fact that there are Native Americans already here, established, happy as I guess we can assume them to be without the Europeans coming to screw up their day. I get all that, but in the minds of the Europeans, it's here, it's available, and there's a lot of it, and so that becomes a motivating factor for those colonists to change the comfort of their position that they're in and actually come to the New World. All right? So we get some newfound land, and that newfound land allows England to make some claim, at least to the eastern seaboard, and if this helps here. You were there, right? So that should, that's Back Creek. Sorry, confused you guys with my other student. There you go. Right, so this is this path from across the Atlantic over to the New World. St. Augustine, Spanish, right? Permanent settlement. There's been a St. Augustine since its founding in the 1580s. The English first settlement. Anybody? Anybody? The first settlement of England? Anybody? Know that one? Jamestown. Yes, Jamestown. Nice. Within the Virginia Charter, Jamestown. Now, there was an attempt before Jamestown. Jamestown's like 1606-ish, right? 1606. Jamestown. Before that, you had Roanoke Island was the attempt to colonize, to create the colony here in Roanoke Island, Virginia, Roanoke, Virginia. That one came and then disappeared. We don't exactly know for sure. Maybe they have better. When I started teaching anyway, it was the lost colony. We don't know exactly what happened. Either migrated onto the mainland or swept away through storms, or Native Americans did away with them across, whatever. We don't know exactly for sure. But that was in the 1585-ish. So here we are, 1492, and already we're talking 1585, right? So again, big leaps in terms of time. I mean, that's it's nearly 100 years, right? Nearly 100 years, 3, 4, 5 generations before we actually begin to colonize after Cabot's or Columbus's discoveries. So it doesn't happen all at once, right? The eventual colonization. Now, again, just because these colonies don't establish themselves doesn't mean there weren't Europeans coming here regularly, reaping the resources. But this is about setting up New England, new towns, right? Establishing new opportunities for the citizens of the homeland, but also in return, establishing or creating wealth back for the homeland. In fact, when it comes to the New England, when it comes to both Jamestown and eventually Plymouth and the other colonies, which we're well familiar with, the relationship to the homeland, which is generally true of colonization in general, is one where there has to be some benefit for the support. I guess you'd say this rational choice theory, or rational choice approach, also comes out of governments, right? States, whether it's through dictatorships, kings, monarchies, oligarchies, whether it's direct democracies or representative democracies, the entity, right, however it's made up, does things that one would assume are going to benefit the entity. That it's not rational for the state to want to destroy itself, right? I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but it needs to be said. So when it comes to colonization, whether it's the colonization of North America or South America or into Africa, when it comes to that colonization, the interest behind that is back to the homeland, right? So we've got the French. They're not necessarily colonizing per se, as much as they're establishing forts and trading outlets to trade these raw resources back to France. We've got the actual established colonies that are then sending these raw resources back to England, right? And then England takes these raw resources and then refines these raw resources and then trades them out to the world, right? Not unlike the silver and not unlike the silk and the spices, they have products that are being traded out, and they have natural customers back here in the colonies for these refined goods. Right? So resources out, raw resources out, refined goods back in. And the relationship is one of really, by intention, a captive market. By intention, it's a captive market. Meaning, by law, by Parliament, to benefit the homeland, this relationship has to exist the way it exists. We need you to feed our manufacturing plants with these raw resources that we can then refine and then ship out. When the colonists, and they do, because it would be rational for them to think this way, when they say, well, rather than send you the raw resources and then buy back the finished goods, why don't we turn them into finished goods here? Why don't we manufacture these products here? And Parliament says, no, that's not your purpose, and puts the kibosh on that. Now, some scholars would say, well, that was only for hats. It was only for very limited things. But regardless, it was Parliament saying to the colonists, no, your job is to feed us these raw resources. Know your job. And with that, if you can imagine, with that, which I think, again, is true of all colonial systems, with that, you create a primary group of citizens and a secondary group of citizens, right? Your job is to be the miner. Our job is to take that and refine it and to benefit from that. You do the work, and we'll do our work, but we're going to benefit more because we're telling you then you have to buy the products that we've now created. And so you can see how you become the secondary citizen to the primary citizen, right? In control of government, deciding who gets what, structuring society for the benefit. And again, look, this is the homeland. It creates the colonies. By design, the colonies are there to service the homeland. There's no reason for the homeland to colonize. So Parliament's going to favor the homeland. The majority of individuals pressuring the government are going to be in the homeland, right? And so it's natural for this primary citizenship versus secondary citizenship to develop. But with that comes the potential, the very real potential, in our case, definitely real potential for revolution, to revolt, to rebel. Like, why are we getting this short end of the stick here? Our quality of life is being negatively impacted by the decisions being made by our government. How long will that last? Well, it lasts for quite a while, actually. right? I mean, we're only in the 1600s. We don't get to 1776 for another couple hundred years, or 100 and a half years, right before the kettle spills over, so to speak, when we get into the American Revolution. Questions so far? Any questions? Everybody following? All right, we're creating context, right? I'm giving you the background that leads to our American system, one that doesn't necessarily, right, support a government that can do anything, one that doesn't necessarily support a government that doesn't treat all men as being created equal, right? You can begin, I think, to see these pieces that they establish these American ideals that are being established right here with this concept of a captive market and the colonization of the New World and an already tiered system of citizenship. Yes? Okay. So, as we move forward, another thing that you might do in terms of, following your economic interests is to say, well, wait a second, if we're going to go through the process of harvesting all these trees, why are we only selling them to England? I mean, other people need trees. Other people need potash. Other people need whale oil, right? But other people need these resources. Why don't we see what Italy's paying for? How about we call up France and see what France would take for a boatload of trees? Maybe we could pay a little bit more. Wouldn't that make sense? Don't you want to maximize, right, the benefit to your toil? Right? Absolutely. So colonists attempt to do that as well. And Parliament says, whoa, hey, that's not the process here. You send them to us. Right? You buy our products, you send the raw resources to us. And Congress, or Parliament, I should say, enforces what are called the Navigation Act, which is that, among other things, only English ships can port in English harbors. You're English, we're English, that's it. Unless the king gives or Parliament gives license otherwise. So that puts the kibosh on trying to ship your wares to other countries to get a better price. Right? So again, you can see how the pressures are being placed within this system to benefit the homeland, which is natural in colonization, imperialism, colonization, but it also can create this rebellion, this pushback from the citizens who don't perceive that the system is acting in its best interest. Fast forward. One of the things that begins to happen as more and more individuals come over and seek their freedom, whether it's religious freedom with the Pilgrims, right, where a portion, about half of those on the Mayflower were religious pilgrims, or other individuals simply seeking to have a better quality of life, have access to resources, maybe change their station in life by coming over and not necessarily having the thumb of the government on them so closely, the freedom and autonomy that's provided by distance, whatever the promise is that drives individuals over to the New World, they come. Now, none of that is very promising to begin with. Now, Jamestown, they don't pick a very good place to establish the second. The first one was a terrible place to pick, I guess. As it turns out, it disappears. But the second is not much better. The colonist death rate is pretty high, and it's hard to entice more and more colonists to come over. Ultimately, what saves Jamestown is tobacco, great cash crop that has some profit behind it, and it's addictive. That helps, I guess. And so that helps to drive individuals seeking both having investment behind them, but also seeking to have that better quality of life. Right? So tobacco saves America. Don't read that and say that box, but it's there. And so as individuals come over, they begin to push westward. And as they push westward, I mean, it's almost like this country never stops. And the bounty of this country only grows the further they seem to go west. I mean, its territory is great. It's great for plantings, great for whatever. The cod, the fishing's great, all that. But as they continue to go west, it seems like it's getting even better, right? Well, there's a problem with that as they push west. And that is the English are not the only individuals with interests in the New World. The Spanish have really focused themselves down into the south, along the coast into Florida. The English are here on the eastern seaboard, among other groups of individuals, but then the French, right? What is Canada? The French have come in and equally powerful, if you will, in terms of military strength and in terms of, they're really England's counter. Even though they're interconnected through relationships and marriages, they're also their counter. And whether it's England and Spain and France, they're kind of the three entities to some degree. You've got the Dutch in there, Portuguese in there, to some degree the Russians in there, but for the most part, it's really those three. It's the English, the French, and the Spanish that are slicing and dicing up this new world fairly quickly. And as I said, these trading posts, a lot of these French, right, whether it's Montreal or Detroit or Mackinac, these very French-sounding names, Wisconsin, they're establishing their relationship and benefiting from that with trade with the Native Americans up and into the north and into the Great Lakes and down into the Ohio Valley. And we're pushing, the English are pushing west. Right? To the dismay of the Crown and Parliament, who are looking to have them pull back, slow that white migration down for this very reason, that at some point in time, there's going to become a conflict. Now, we had established a fairly decent relationship with the Native Americans within the areas of our colonies, the Iroquois Nation, but on the frontier, we didn't have a very good relationship, we being the English. And as we pushed out further, we subjected ourselves to more and more Indian raids and hostilities with the Indian Native Americans. And in particular, when we get to the French and their Indian allies, and the English and their perceived Indian allies in the Ohio Valley, that's where we ultimately have a huge conflict. Right? Does anybody know the name of that conflict? Anybody? French and Indian War. Yes, French and Indian War. Nice, right. Otherwise known as the 7 Years' War, because it lasts for 9 years. I don't know how that happened, but that's where it's basically, well, I think I only explained the beginning of 1 year and the end of another year. But regardless, the 7 Years' War, 1754. 1754. So, wait a minute. We were at 1492 at the beginning of this lecture, right? We've blown through 1585. We're now at 1754. All right? Again, it's not like it happens all at once. It's not like this change, the dialectical method, right, of the way things are and the way things could be. It's not a violent change. It's a very slow, methodical change. It gets violent towards the end, but it's a very slow, methodical change from the system that is Parliament, King, Crown, oversight, colonies, colonists, subservient, the sovereign, to our system of independence, own country, representative democracy, constitutional government. Totally different. The way things are, the way things could be. It takes a while to get there. We're at 1754. Not too far, all things considered, from 1776, our own Declaration of Independence. But we still got a generation to get there. But the players who are involved here, we come to find them involved here as well. Washington, right? General Washington, the first president of the United States, is involved in this French and Indian War. He's a part of it. He's a part of the English American army, military, that's fighting the French. And we call it the French and Indian War because it's not a war between the French and Indians, it's a war between the French and their Native American and Indian allies, right? And a fight between the British, right? The Brits, the quote-unquote Americans, and their Native American allies, right? And those are the two forces that fight this out. Like I said, the Iroquois Nation, the other Native Americans are familiar to us here, living in Michigan, right? The Ottawa, Chippewa, Hurons, the Miami band, Potawatomi, these different Native American tribes that we're familiar with, because they're so central to our culture here in the state of Michigan, they were on the side of the French, right? And this war, as we know, happens. lasts the 7 years, 9 years, because it's 1763 is where its end comes. But we know, if you know your history, you know that France, right, cedes, right, surrender cedes Canada to England, and backs down and backs out of this war. And with that, these different forts, right, including Detroit, right, including Mackinac, right, these trading posts, these forts, they become English, no longer French. We won. Okay, so say we, well, the English won. So what's the next step? Okay, the world gets a lot smaller for the colonists. The colonists that had the benefit of being so far away that it was really tough for the English to really focus in on them and to force implementation and compliance to the structure and the laws of deciding who gets what. Right, if you go back to our 5 steps of the policy process, to build, formulate, adopt, implement, and evaluate. Right, not so different than the research process we just went over in sociology. But in this process, the 5 steps, identifying a problem, right, for policy, identifying a policy issue, formulating a solution to that issue or that problem, adopting the best solution, implementing that solution, and then evaluating its effectiveness. Those are the 5 steps. All governments go through those 5 steps. It doesn't matter what your structure is, you're going to go through these 5 steps. Well, the ability to build, formulate, adopt, implement, and even evaluate is hampered quite a bit by the distance of the Atlantic between those who are making the laws and the rules and those who are following or supporting those laws and rules. So there's a lot of self-governance that's already taken place. Well, the world gets a lot smaller. And it gets a lot smaller because of the French and Indian War. It gets a lot smaller because of the reliance upon the trade with the colonies that can be disrupted by decisions being made here about how to maximize benefit for the toil. And so in order to clamp down and to make sure that the colonies were more closely following the policies and what was in the interest of the homeland, once this war was fought, once this war was ended, all of these redcoats, and I'll use red now, that were sent, these regulars that were sent from England to help fight this war with the colonists who participated, not all, but most participated on the side of their sovereign, rather than bring this military presence back, the military presence is left here for oversight purposes. Right? They're left here. So now you've got the regulars, or you've got the government, you've got the police force that really wasn't there before, you've got it here. And they're not going back. So whatever dalliances there were in terms of, right, black bootlegging your contraband out to other countries, sailing into Barbados and the Caribbean islands, raising up a different flag is the way to get around the navigation laws. That's going to get closed in upon, right? And to keep this westward migration, which is continuing, right, but beginning to really disrupt the balance of power between those who are amassing resources in their migration and the old rich who are over here with their hand in the pockets of I should say Parliament with their hand in their pockets, and then those individuals with their lips to their Parliament's ear. These individuals are beginning to be challenged by these individuals. And so Crown and Parliament says, okay, we need to put an end to this. We're going to do it, we're going to say it's to benefit the Native Americans, but what we really need to do is we need to hem in the amount of land grab that's taking place in this westward migration. It's disrupting this balance of power. Well, that's a goal as well. So now we've got the government here. I'm going to call them babysitters, and I think that's appropriate because the colonists see themselves as adults. They see themselves as equals. We're equal. right? But yet we've got babysitters. Dude, come on. And just to turn that around or take it up a notch, look at you guys. You're pretty old, pretty responsible. Your parents are going away for a weekend. Right? Parents leave. How often do they get you a babysit? Right? They don't, right? They don't get you a babysitter. You would be offended. And I'm not talking like a cute babysitter or something like that. I'm just talking like, like your Aunt Gerda. I don't know. Your Aunt Gerda is coming over, and your parents are telling you that she's going to stay with you over the weekend while we're gone. And so, boom, all of that autonomy and freedom that you were thinking about, like, oh, we're going to have a party, and I'm going to eat pizza, and I'm going to play, The Last of Us on my PS4 till midnight. It's going to be awesome. All that's gone. Because Gerda's coming in with her, her iron fist, and I don't know, in my mind, she's the kind of individual who carries, carries a paddle around with her, right? Something like, you kids. Anyway, it gets worse. Worse than that? Yeah. Not only do your parents tell you that you're going to get a babysitter, and it's going to be Aunt Gerda. By the way, Aunt Gerda's not going to just be stopping in every once in a while. She's going to be staying with you. And when I say staying with you, she's going to be actually sleeping in your room. You don't get to pick your own room. She's going to be in your room. And you may as well just get out of your bed, vacate, and sleep in the corner, but she's going to be in your room. Keep an eyeball on her. And, Gerda, somebody's going to need to clean her clothes. Someone's going to need to feed her, because her main job is just going to be babysitting, right? That's her job. And so while she's doing her job, someone needs to take care of her. And here's the worst of it. We can't afford to pay Gerda. So you're going to have to pay her. How terrible does that sound? You would come unglued, right? You and your parents would have a talking. Wouldn't you agree? And you may lose that talking, but you're going to have a talk. Like, this is unreasonable. Well, why is it going to be in my room? Why do I have to pay? Why is this going to be? I don't need a babysitter. Look, all of these kind of micro ideas that you have are going on in the macro when it comes to the colonies. Not everybody, but a number of individuals who are quartering these soldiers in their homes by edict, right, by law, taking care of these troops, these babysitters, while the country is brought under control via Parliament and the Crown. It doesn't go over so well. And it really, right, 63, 76 isn't far away. This doesn't last long. And Gerda does not last long. It's tolerated for a while, but eventually it leads to the American Revolution. And probably, as much as anything, the quartering of soldiers was the straw that breaks the camel's back. In fact, when you look at the state constitutions that arise after the Declaration of Independence, where we declare we are no longer English, we are now independent of the English, we have to establish our own government, state by state. No longer colonies, now states have to establish their own governments. And as they do that, they create their own constitutions. And in those constitutions, the rationale as to why, a lot of them put in that quartering soldiers, the having to have those in my castle, in my home, as if I have no private property. It's a big one. So, this is taking place. And remember I told you that you're going to have to pay Gerda? Right? Gerda doesn't have her own income coming. She does. But to offset that, you're going to have to pony up. That, passed by Parliament, is what we call the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was a tax placed upon a number of things: paper, playing cards, whiskey labels, playbills, right, for plays, that if you printed anything or you sold a piece of paper or a piece of paper was attached to it, it had to be paper that had the seal of the crown on it, or it had to be from the crown's warehouse. And to get that paper, you paid for the paper plus the tax on that paper. And that tax was meant to offset the cost of GERDA. Well, that doesn't go over so well. This is where we get the calls of, hey, wait a second. One, how is this in our interest? We don't believe it to be. And two, why are we paying for it? Well, why should we pay for it? It's your problem. We shouldn't pay for it over here. You should pay for it. Well, I don't believe that to be fair. This is taxation without representation. Oh, yeah, representation. Yeah, you guys nailed it. Yeah, it's taxation without representation. And somebody had asked the question, why, about the fairness of taxes, right? And we've gotten kind of a discussion about why some individuals would pay their taxes and why other individuals may cheat on their taxes. And part of it is believing the tax to be legitimate. And so if you don't believe the tax is legitimate, and again, not everybody argued or disagreed, it's the way it always is, right? There's going to be a group that disagrees and a group that certainly doesn't disagree, but a large enough group disagrees with this taxes, believing it to be unfair, believing it to be unnecessary, going to something that's not in their interest, that they push back. And they push back pretty hard. You know, in certain communities, they burn the paper houses. They beat up the tax inspector. The individual's job was to come and make sure, oh, I see that you're reading something there. There's no stamp on this. You're going to have to pay the penalty. Beat the snot out of that guy, right? And then they go burn the paper house with all the special paper in it. Well, bills formulate, adopt, implement, evaluate. How's this going? Well, it gets back that it's not going so well. So Parliament now has to make a decision. What are we going to do? So Parliament decides, King Crown decides, you know what, let's repeal the Stamp Act. We'll repeal it. Right? So the Stamp Act, we'll repeal it. And here's the problem, right? The problem is we're the government, right? Our job is to make the laws, pass the policies. Your job is to follow them. If we're repealing laws because you don't like them, that's very dangerous. So we need to make sure that you know that we repealed this law, not because you are given such a fit about it, but because we determined that there's a better way to tax you. And they actually do. They pass it's called the Townsend Duties. The Townsend Duties, which is just more taxes, but it's on more things. And it's harder to thwart. Right? But in between the repeal of the Stamp Act and the passage of the Townsend Duties, Parliament says we need to make sure these colonists understand their position, understand their lot in life. Your job, colonists, is to do what you're told. We will tell you whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. We represent you. We're looking out for your interests. And even if you don't think we are, tough. Your job is to do what we tell you to do. That's called the Declaratory Act. They actually write that down. They put it on paper. I want to pull you guys up into a website, which I think you're going to want to get into your repertoire. It's actually it's hot linked through your Moodle class. System went down. So it's hot linked into your Moodle class, but I just want to give you the website. And actually, just give you 2 words to key phrase anytime, or 2 keywords to enter into any web search, and it'll get you there. And the words are Yale and Avalon. Yale and Avalon. Yale and Avalon. And the Yale's Avalon project is a project by the Yale Law School. And what it does, one of the things that they've done is they've gone out and they've got all this context, if you will, these background papers and documents, and they've put it into one repository where they scan them in, and so they're searchable and written in the ones that are in English are written in clear English, and so you can go and search all of these documents again through this one site. All right. Okay. So if you, like I said, any web engine, right, just Yale, Avalon, right, and you'll see the Constitution Project right here, all right, and there it is. All right, and again, I know it's hot linked in your Moodle, but I want you to be able to get to this because, again, from ancient documents all the way up, there's a number of different pieces, articles, constitutions, the Bill of Rights, the different treaties, the different agreements written, the notes of Madison, the notes of Jefferson, the notes of Adams, the notes of Ben Franklin, all in regard to the thinking of the time going into the Declaration of Independence, going in to our own American Constitution. So we've said, right, there's one true way to interpret the written word, and that is as the author intended it to be interpreted. But our problem is we can't talk to Madison. We can't talk to Governor Morris. We can't talk to these individuals so influential in writing the Constitution. So how do we know what their intentions were, short of our ability to ask them? And the answer to that is, well, we can get it as close as we can get it by going in and seeing what kind of surrounding documents, ancillary works surround those, the time. And we have that. We have that information, at least compiled to the degree it is, in projects like this. So use this. This is a great resource, specifically when making your claims into your positions of what government should or shouldn't do, and using the Constitution, right, as your shield and sword in your fight either for government or against government. So if we go into the 18th century, which is the 1700s, but 18th century documents, right? The Boston Port Act, again, British American diplomacy, right? Lots of background. The Charter of Georgia, even before Georgia was a state as a colony, the Charter of Delaware before it was a colony, before it was a state. Right? The constitutions, right? Look at 1776, 1776, 1776, right? 1776. Before the Declaration of Independence is even ratified, right, and sent out, South Carolina had already had its own constitution in place, and then after reestablished a new constitution. Right? So these different documents exist. Now we're looking for the Declaratory Act. Here it is, right? And in my mind, after this is passed by Parliament, it has to come over. There's no email, internet. There's no CNN. There's nobody to read it over the air. So it's not instant. It has to get back, and then it has to be conveyed to those individuals who have to follow the law. And so the Declaratory comes back, and I assume, in my mind, it's read by some, guy in knickers with a triangle cap as he's reading it at the town crier. It's like, whereas several of the houses of representatives in His Majesty's colonies and plantations in America have of late against law claimed to themselves or to the general assemblies of the same the sole and exclusive right of imposing duties and taxes upon His Majesty's subjects in the said colonies and plantations, and have, in pursuance of such claim, passed certain votes, resolutions, and orders derogatory to the legislative authority of Parliament and inconsistent with the dependency of the said colonies and plantations upon the Crown of Great Britain. May it therefore please your excellent Majesty that it may be declared and be declared by your King's most excellent Majesty by and with the advice of the consent of the Lord, spiritual and temporal and commons, in the present Parliament assembled, and by authority of the same, that the said colonies and plantations in America have been, are, and of right ought to be subordinate unto and dependent upon the imperial crown and Parliament of Great Britain, and that the King's Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Lord, spiritual and temporal, and the commons of the Great Britain, the Parliament assembled, had both in right ought to have full power and authority to make laws and statutes to sufficient enforce the validity to bind the colonies and the American people subjects of the crown of the Great Britain in all cases whatsoever. So that's how it's read, I assume. Yeah, not bad, huh? But how it's taken, right, how it's, right? There's one thing that we read it, and when we read it, I do think that it's, I mean, I don't think there's any other way to absorb it and interpret it other than you do what you're effing told, right? This whole burning the paper houses stuff, that doesn't fly. You've been passing your own laws and think that you somehow have some power that we haven't given you. It doesn't work like that. It comes from God to the king through parliament down to you, peon. Power flows this way. You do what you're told. This is how the declaratory, I think it's how it's written. I assume it's how it's taken because it does not go over well, right? You do what you're told. If we tell you you only trade with us, you only trade with us. You don't go sending your little ships with your little flags and create new trade relations. You don't do that. We tell you to go any further west. You don't go any further west. You stay where we tell you to stay. We tell you put anchor in your room. You put anchor in your room. And if we tell you to pay a tax, you pay a tax. That's your job. We tell you what to do. We are the government. You are the subject. That's your lot in life. Well, that just does not go over well, right? I mean, that wouldn't go over well, right? I mean, putting dirt in your room didn't go over well. Then having your parents come back and tell you, look, that's just the way it's going to be. You're going to live in my house, under my roof. You're going to do what you're freaking told to do. That is every last statement ever from a parent who watches their child run away, right? Right? Well, that is kind of our relationship or our reaction to this. The Townsend duties are passed, and again, great website here. Right? So we can go back and we could take a look at the Stamp Act. Here's the Stamp Act, 1765, right? And so it's an act, and look, for every skin or piece of vellum of parchment or sheet of piece of paper shall be engrossed, written, or printed in any declaration, plea, replicate, right? 3 pence. For any skin, piece of paper, right? So it's basically anything that's written on, 4 pence, 3 pence, 2 pence, 4 pence a dollar, all for England, stand up and holler. I don't, whatever they came up with this, right? Boom, 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 boom. Every pack of playing cards, even dice, 10 shillings. Boom, 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 boom. This is pushed back against, right? This does not go over well. The Declaratory Act, and then the Declaratory Act, you think, okay, you know what? Fine. You want to tell us that this is, all right, we get you. Go ahead. Bark, 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 bark. That's great. But then they come back and then pass the Townsend Act or the Townsend duties, which is just more taxes. Right? So they basically say we're going to repeal the Stamp Act and then we're going to replace it with actually just more taxes. So if you didn't think the last set of taxes were good, this set's not any better, and it's actually harder to thwart, right? Because they're import-export taxes, right? And when you're a captive market, that's everything. It does not go over well. So I'm going to leave you with the last part of this, right? As we're coming up on the 2 o'clock hour. We have our answer to the Declaratory Act. It's our own declaration. And if this is where context and content come together. I'm just giving you a whole bunch of context leading up now to the declaration, our own declaration, the Declaration of Independence. And if you read, knowing the Declaratory Act, knowing the events leading up to our Declaration of Independence, the words should make sense. They're not just out there on their own. They've got background now. They've got support to understanding, right? So the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence is the same as any introductory paragraph, right? It just tells you what you're about to read and maybe why we embarked on this. And in this case, look, if we're going to be, all right, any for future edification, future support, for future understanding, it's important for us to write down why it is that we're declaring our independence. And so that's what that first paragraph is. It just tells individuals that are about to read the Declaration of Independence why they're even writing this down and not just simply revolting. These are the reasons why. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And I just want to stop real quick. I love that It doesn't take an act of parliament, the king, the crown, this large spiritual and temporal, to let this be known. It is a self-evident truth. It is a fact. We know it, and you know it too. It's self-evident that all men are created equal, that there's not a special class of individuals. Well, man, that's heresy, right? There is a special class of individuals. God has touched this leader. No, that's not how it works. All right? God doesn't. All men are created equal. And they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That simply by being born, you have these rights. The rights, they're not all inclusive. Among these rights, it says, among these rights. It's not all inclusive, but among these rights are the right to life and to liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And I like to think that pursuit of happiness is our quality of life hill. That you, whatever it is that gets you to your top of your quality of life, you have the right to push for that, to fight for that. All individuals have that right, simply by being born. And among these rights are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. You've got it wrong, Parliament. You've got it wrong, Crown. We allow you to govern. We create governments for these things, for life, for liberty, for that pursuit of happiness. That's why we have government. Remember, we had jungle law, and we rejected that. We want policies. We want laws. The question is, what laws, what policies, how intrusive should they be? How supportive should they be? That's the argument, but the fact of the matter is we choose to have laws. The government, whose job it is to create and enforce those laws, we create you. You get your power from us, deriving the just power from the consent of the government. Put a little smiley face on that, man. All right? You do what we tell you to do. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. And that when any government becomes destructive to this relationship, to these ends, when it forgets its place, it's the right of the people to alter that government, right? To change its course. Same government, if we can change its course to get it back to serving the people, right? That is our right. And if it will not be changed, if it cannot be changed, then it is the right of the people to abolish this government, to get rid of it, and to establish a new one that will service its happiness and its safety. In other words, according to the Declaration of Independence, this government has failed, and it won't be altered. In fact, the colonists go through great lengths trying to negotiate with the crown a relationship, a better relationship. They pushed a little hard, and some of the states or some of the colonies were saying, look, we need to fall on our knees. We need to gain favor. We need to plead that this push to pressure and to put more taxes and to take away more freedoms, that we can somehow turn this around. Parliament and the crown is not budging. And even before we get to the Declaration of Independence, right, we've got shots fired. We've got Concord and Lexington, right? We've got people dying, and we've got encroachment and and the full weight of the English Navy, the British Navy, in the harbors of our eastern seaboard. So, under duress, we still end up defining and declaring our independence. Yeah, you're all in right there. As they said, the individuals who signed that were signing their death warrant. You're all in. Because you're basically saying what was tolerable is now intolerable. And we're done. And let's see how this goes. Now, again, the hope, I'm sure, was that we could have somehow, again, negotiated a peace, come back under the order, have better terms, but it doesn't go that way. It goes into the American Revolution, a hard-fought, bloody battle between right? The rebel states, a rebellion, if you're in England, it's a rebellion. But for us, it's a push for independence and a better quality of life in our own control of our own future. Context. Now we have the Declaration of Independence, and we know that we win this American Revolution. And so then we're in a situation again where we've got to decide, all right, what kind of government are we going to have now? And that's where we'll pick it up when we come back next Tuesday. Again, I'm going to be talking about this in my Wednesday class, probably streaming it. So take the opportunity to kind of watch that, just so we're not leaving any big gaps in our history and our context. Okay. Have a great weekend, you guys. I'll see you then next Tuesday.